Hi, my name's Kim. It's a real pleasure to be here today. Thanks very much to the organisers. There's a lot of new faces for me. This isn't a group that I've engaged with before. I'm the manager of the Humanitarian Innovation Fund, which is a grant-making organisation which supports people and organisations to develop and test innovations in operational humanitarian practice. On Friday, I'm going to be talking about how you can get your hands on our funding, but right now I'm going to talk broadly about innovation, but very specifically about what that looks like in the humanitarian system. I'm going to start by talking about some of the things we funded. We funded UNICEF to develop an app for rapid family tracing and unification in emergencies. We've also funded things like Speed SMS and recently OCHA to develop the humanitarian exchange language. I'm going to talk a little bit more about a project that we funded in Haiti after the earthquake, where we funded a very small component of a big beneficiary communications program. We funded the integrated voice recognition component, which allowed the organization to communicate with large numbers of people in an automated way. And what I found really fascinating about this was it involved a real multitude of different elements to communicate with beneficiaries. Some of those were very high tech, but others were very low tech around using radio and also halos and other methods like sound cards. And I think it's really important to underline that although new technologies are very important, can be transformational, not to throw out the old methods that still work very well. And in the Humanitarian Innovation Fund, although we've given money to a lot of tech projects, we've also funded some very low-tech things. One example is a program that we funded in Sierra Leone, which was looking at how you can engage children in water and sanitation programs. No technology at all, very much a process that changed the way that programming people thought about how they delivered services. And I think it's important to note that technology and innovation aren't synonymous, which raises the question then, what do we mean when we're talking about innovation, and what does that look like in the humanitarian system? I think many people have a vision of the system as being this huge industrial monolith, which turns up places and can in some instances do as much harm as it does good. But I think that kind of misunderstands what the humanitarian system really looks like, because rather than being a cohesive whole, I would argue that it's actually a network made up of lots of different organizations which are interdependent but also fiercely protective of their independence. And it's really important to understand about that when we think about how we want to engage it and how we want to leverage change. Because it's no good understanding it as a whole that you can engage with in one point, and there's no point in thinking that it will change in a unified way. But it is important to notice that the system does have huge amounts of capacity to respond, but that capacity isn't always centralized. This image is of Oxfam, which is an agency which, as in this image from Pakistan, has huge capacity, but likes to remain one step out of some of the coordination mechanisms around which aid is delivered. And it's important when thinking to engage. Also, it's important to know that the system does know it needs to change, both because of changes in crisis context, increasing hazards in severity and frequency, but also changes in the context, more engaged, affected populations wanting different types of assistance. Which takes us back to how we think about the system as tried to change traditionally, through codes and standards, through increasing accountability, through types of partnership, and through structural reform. And this has been really, really important, and I think the system has improved its performance over the last 10 or 15 years through these methods. But to a certain extent, it's been tinkering around the edges. And I would argue it hasn't really led to the kind of transformational change that we need to see if we're going to have a humanitarian system fit for the 21st century. Which then again raises this question of how we bring about innovation in the system and what that's going to look like. Because I think that the system has begun to try and innovate, but many of the models which it's been basing this on are outdated and don't fit the nature of the system that I was talking about a little bit before. Many of the traditional models of innovation that some of you in the private sector will be very familiar with are to do with consolidated research and development, high investment in specialized teams who are able to take risks and experiment. And this is a really, really successful model for people like Lockheed Martin in Skunk Works. It's allowed them to develop numerous new technologies. But I would argue that it's not a realistic model for the humanitarian system, given the resources that it has. Instead, we need a much more open model that looks around capturing the ideas that are being disruptive at the edges of the system and engaging with people outside the system and funneling those ideas in, capturing the best ones and promoting them. And that's what we try to do in the Humanitarian Innovation Fund, encouraging people to share risks, encouraging them to collaborate and to share the costs of research and development, and encouraging them to share the profits and the benefits of that. Which brings me back to why I think it's really important to come here and to see what this community can do to engage better. Because there's some things that I see in the digital and technology communities that I think it's really good at, that humanitarians have been very bad at. And that's around collaboration, meaningful collaboration. It's around engaging users, and it's around taking risks. And I think that the digital and technology communities, through things like agile software development, have been really, really good at this. And I want to know how we can better leverage those competencies and skills, not just to bring in new technologies, but to bring about transformational change in the system. And that's what I'm really interested to discuss over the next couple of days here. Thanks very much.